Alright, so I got a lot of requests for this video. It's going to be a tier list of red flags. Now, there's a couple disclaimers I want to make before I continue. The main assumption for this tier list is that you're looking for a girl that's long-term worthy. This list will be subject to change. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know in the comments. S tier is the strongest red flag, and D tier is the weakest red flag. Let's get started. The first one is wants to check your phone all the time. This one's pretty bad because it leads to a whole lot of control. It's going to be very hard for you to maintain that masculine frame you need to maintain long-term attraction. If she's constantly anxious about who you're talking to, it probably means she doesn't trust you that much. For this reason, we're actually going to put this in S tier. No girl I ever date is going to have access to my phone. That's just ridiculous. I'm looking for a partner, not a supervisor or a mother. Now, of course, a lot of people are going to ask, oh, but is it equal in reverse? And the truth is, no, it's not. Your girl shouldn't be able to have access to your phone, but you should be able to have access to hers whenever you want. A lot of people are going to cry about this, but this is the nature of being dominant and being submissive. Now, to clarify, if we're being completely realistic, you shouldn't be checking her phone all the time either. If you're constantly asking her to look at her phone because you're scared, it'll just look like you're weak. You should be able to read from her behavior if she's into you anymore or not. So checking through her phone is purely when you know 100% that there's somebody else and you just want to confirm it. I don't really recommend this anyways. Most of the time it backfires. Types in all lowercase. This one's really not that heavy. I guess a lot of people are going to say it indicates how good she is at language or whatever. I have noticed that girls that are educated are more likely to do proper sentences, but I mean, texting is supposed to be casual, so it's not really that hardcore of an indicator. For that reason, I'm going to put it into D tier. Makes you cut off your friends. Okay, this is absolutely S tier. This one actually is probably even higher than the other one, so I'm going to put it at the top of S tier for now. If a girl is trying to control you by making you cut off your friends, you have a big problem. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but you as a guy, you need your guy friends. They're the only people that can be in your life from a pure perspective without some sort of crazy vested interest. A girl's happiness with you is always going to be tied to your financial status, how you're doing, your happiness levels. With guy friends, it doesn't really work this way. The moment she tries to make you cut off friends, it means she's trying to control you so she can completely control the narrative. If you let her do this, you're the problem. This is a massive red flag, guys. You should really not overlook this one. Car fanatic is quite interesting because I think in a lot of ways it sort of demonstrates something about her personality. The car hobby in general is a masculine hobby, and it's not to say that girls can't engage in this hobby, but what I have noticed is most of the time, girls that get into the car scene are usually pick-me girls, otherwise known as tire biters. That being said, I don't think it's quite S tier, but I will put it in A tier. The main reason I'm putting it in A tier is because a car fanatic is a bit of a spectrum. A girl might buy a bubble car like an Audi TT and call herself a car fanatic. Most of the time, that type of girl is not the one that's going to go to the local car meet and show off her car. When I think of a car fanatic, I think of a person that goes to a car meet and shows their car off with everybody else. This is the type of girl that's an A tier red flag. The next one is compares you with her ex. So I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. Every girl ever is always going to compare you to her ex. It's just that some are outwardly about it and some are going to be very covert about it, meaning they're not going to tell you directly what they're thinking. For the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that comparing you with her ex means overt. So she's telling you directly about how you don't match up to her ex. Honestly, for this one, I'm going to put this at the top of S tier, because if she's comparing you to her ex, it means that she likely hasn't gotten over him. Making you cut off your friends is pretty bad. Wanting to check your phone all the time is pretty bad from a control perspective, but nothing is worse than having an ex on her mind that she can't get over. This is a really, really bad red flag, guys. And if she does this, she really doesn't respect you that much. Get out as soon as possible. All right, always responds with, I don't care. This one can go both ways, guys, because there is the case of a submissive girl that really likes to do anything with you and she really doesn't care. There's also the case of the girl that's not very engaged. I think that might be what this is going for, but even then it's still not that heavy. I guess you just have to read the situation a little bit. If you're already at that point where she doesn't care about anything you're doing, probably time to move on. I'm going to assume that this one right here is when you ask a girl what she wants to do and she says, I don't care. The truth is though, you really shouldn't be asking her what to do that often regardless. For that reason, I'm going to put this in D tier. This one you have to interpret a little bit because it's not extremely clear, but I sort of gave my reasoning anyway. All right, so dresses for more than your eyes. This one's pretty bad. I'm going to put this in S tier. Second, after comparing with your ex, if she's actively recruiting while she's with you, you are just temporary. At this point, this is obviously a lack of respect, and you won't really get anywhere in this relationship for the long term. If she's doing this, I would not bother. Move on immediately. All right, overly quirky. This one's a bit weird because me personally, it's not really my thing. So I'd probably put this in B or A, but I think these days a lot of guys like overly quirky girls. So for that reason, I'm probably going to settle on C tier for now. I might change that one. I think C tier is a pretty good place. Just because she's overly quirky doesn't mean she'll be a bad long-term partner. Maybe she's a bit socially awkward or extremely nerdy, dorky, whatever it is. This list is obviously based on long-term partner potential. Being overly quirky doesn't really affect that, so I'm going to put it into C tier. TikTok user. So I'm going to be honest, guys. Pretty much everyone's on TikTok. You're not going to be able to escape this. So for that reason, I'm going to put this in D tier. Sure, you can call it a red flag all you want. Maybe it is. Everybody's doom scrolling all the time now. So if you base your decision on dating someone, whether or not they're a TikTok user, you're probably not going to have anyone left to date, honestly. It is what it is. I don't love the reality of it, but it's how it goes, so I'm going to put into D tier. Always needs new iPhone. I mean, sure, we can call it a bit materialistic. I mean, the last few iPhones have been more or less the same. It could indicate that she wants the newest thing, but then again, who doesn't? I guess the key word here is needs the new iPhone, not wants. Everybody wants it. She always needs a new iPhone. There's probably a touch of entitlement behind that, so for that reason, I'm going to put this in B tier. Girls that are entitled to things are very hard to date long term. Even if you buy them the new thing, they're always going to want to buy the new thing, even if it's a total waste of money just for the sake of it being new. For this reason, your upkeep is going to be extremely high on this type of woman, and even if you have millions of dollars, at some point you have to consider the principle of it. Just because you have millions of dollars doesn't mean you should spend on something that's not worth spending on. At the same time, there's definitely worse red flags in this, and I'll be honest, if the girl's pretty enough, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to be willing to pay this price. For that reason, I'll put it in B tier. Excessive jealousy. This one's a bit interesting because, let's be honest, if your girl isn't a little bit jealous, she probably doesn't like you that much. When girls really like a guy, they think that every other girl in the world likes them as well. The main reason for this is because every girl on earth thinks she's special in some way. Because she's special and likes you, every other girl in the world must also, by default, like you. It's a bit of a self-importance thing, for being honest. Once we get into the excessive territory, it becomes a lot to deal with, especially if it's going on all the time. I know a lot of guys experience this. They're in a restaurant, some girl says something nice to you, now your girl repeats that line over and over. To me, it's already getting into that excessive territory because that small little thing is affecting her that much when really you didn't do anything. This is a lot of emotions for you to deal with, so if you can't deal with this correctly, it can definitely create a problem for a long-term relationship. For that reason, I'm probably going to put this into A tier, and I'm going to put it above Car Fanatic. Spends too much money. This one's a little bit similar to the iPhone, but at least with the iPhone, it's only specific to that. But the idea is very similar, but now we're talking about in general. So if a girl spends too much money, it will always be a headache for you and you're never going to be able to curb it. Once again, right? Even if you are a millionaire and you have tons of disposable income, it doesn't mean that a girl should just be spending it just because you have it. If she spends too much of her own money, she will guaranteed spend too much of your money. It's always easier to spend someone else's money than our own money, of course. For this reason, I'm going to legitimately put this in S tier. It's definitely not the top of S tier. Having a lack of respect is always going to be much worse than spending too much money. Spending too much money has nothing to do with you directly, but eventually it will affect you long term. For that reason, I'll put it at the bottom of S tier for now. Botox, fillers, surgery. So this one's a bit of an interesting one. I guess for this one, it really depends on how excessive it is. If she's using these things to completely change what she looks like to the point that she's unrecognizable, I think it could create a problem because now you're attracted to someone who doesn't actually look like that. The obvious long-term consequence is your child is not going to look like her. It's going to look like the version of her before she got all the surgeries done. When girls are extremely feminine, they also tend to be very vain. That vanity leads them to want to exploit the system if they can. The other thing to consider is that it doesn't directly affect you unless you're the one that's paying for it. Most of the time though, girls that are into Botox, fillers, or surgery, they usually go for guys that have a lot of money because they want to be supported in that way, because generally speaking, they're quite feminine. For this reason, even though I tend to not love it, I'm going to put it into B tier. I feel like this one's going to be controversial to be in B tier, but it is what it is. I'll leave it there for now and I'll think about it a little bit more. All right, so this one is always fun. OnlyFans account. Okay, so OnlyFans account immediately goes to the top. If a girl's crossed that mental boundary where she's now comfortable selling sexuality on the internet, it's pretty much impossible to have a proper long-term relationship with her. Obviously, a lot of girls are going to cope with this saying, oh, work is work and who I am personally is different. They try to dissociate these two personalities to try to pretend that they can play both games. But the reality is, it just doesn't work this way. As a man, obviously, all men are going to want a girl's femininity and sexuality purely to themselves, not to be shared with everybody else. If everybody has it, it's not that valuable. The other issue is, if she is extremely attractive and makes a lot of money off of it, her whole perception of life is completely skewed. How can she possibly respect hard work when all she has to do is go on the internet and make a ton of money by just showing herself? There's a tiny fraction of guys that can date girls like this and maybe make it last some period of time. To be honest though, I think it's almost impossible for a man of quality to grow old with an OnlyFans girl. I just don't see this being a realistic thing. Sure, there probably is some spineless guys out there that will date them and take them seriously for some period of time, but eventually it's going to eat them alive and they won't be able to handle it anymore. It's shocking to me how many people even try to debate this as if it isn't the most obvious thing on earth. It goes completely against their animal instinct. So obviously it's going to be a huge problem for guys, and the fact that girls try to sell it so hard is such extreme cope, but I'll leave it at that. Top of S tier. If you guys liked the video so far, don't forget to hit the like button. Gaslighting. All right, so this one, gaslighting is tough because I think a lot of girls, not all in this case, I would say there's a fairly large subsect of girls that will do this when they don't get their way. They're going to turn to you, shame, guilt, whatever, when they don't get their way. And I think that as a guy, it's really important that you become resistant to these things. That being said, even if you are really resistant to gaslighting and you can manage it every single time, it takes a lot of energy because now you're going to be baited into some sort of an argument. Anytime a girl is trying to manipulate the frame of the situation to give her the benefit over you, it will create problems long term because now she's not being submissive. Instead, she's trying to manipulate the situation to give her the greatest benefit. As I said, there's a large subsect of women, especially the attractive ones, that will do this in some form. That being said, I'm going to put this in A tier. The main reason I'm putting it here is that most guys honestly can't handle it correctly, so this will cause problems in your relationship, and from a long-term perspective, you have to be a bit of a stubborn animal to deal with this, and these days most guys aren't, so they will fall victim to this. Loud chewing. This is one of those decorum things. I really don't like it when girls don't have that basic level of understanding to act a certain way in public. The thing with this one though, does it really affect the long-term relationship that much? I mean, it just comes down to your tolerance, but it doesn't directly affect you in a negative way. If she's a good person and this is just one of those things that she just does, I mean, it may be worth tolerating for you, right? For that reason, I'm going to put it in D tier. Constantly tries to take pictures of you. I don't really understand this one. I mean, if she likes you that much, she's going to want to take pictures of you. I'd argue it's a pretty good thing. I mean, I don't really see how taking pictures of you is a control thing unless she always wants you to post her on social media. In this case, it doesn't say that, so I'm going to go with she's just trying to take pictures of you. I would personally respond positively to this because it means that she really likes you. For that reason, I don't think it's that heavy of a red flag. I'm going to put this in D tier. Septum piercing. All right. So with septum piercing, I mean, what really is it? It's a rebellion of some sort. Most girls won't do a septum piercing, obviously. The ones that do, they generally do it for some sort of rebellious purpose, whether they want to admit it to themselves or not. It's the same with girls that get tons of piercings all over their ears and stuff, is they're trying to rebel in some way, and this is one of the forms that takes. Girls that rebel and want to fight, they tend to be more masculine, and if they're more masculine, it's harder to maintain them in a long-term relationship. Is it possible to maintain them? I mean, of course it is. Guys do it, but if we're talking about ideal long-term relationship, the septum piercing could indicate a bit of a rebellious masculine nature. You're gonna have a harder time managing that. I'm going to put this into A tier. A lot of people probably would debate the septum piercing versus the Botox filler, but the key here is feminine, masculine. Septum piercing is masculine. Botox fillers and surgery, it's a feminine expression most of the time. All right, tattoos. So tattoos are very similar to the septum piercing. Once again, it indicates a potentially masculine nature. I will say though, these days it's becoming less and less the case. Getting tattoos now isn't as rebellious as it was 10, 15, or 20 years ago. If anything, now it's becoming more of a mainstream thing. For that reason, it's not always clear if it is a masculine expression or not, but I'm still going to assume that many times it is. For that reason, I'm going to put it slightly ahead of septum piercing because it's way harder to reverse a tattoo than a septum piercing. Tattoos are always a very controversial one just because everybody has them now. Like I said, you have to use a little bit of discernment with this. I do know a number of girls that have a few tattoos, like little ones on their arm or on their leg or whatever. It's not the most defining thing, but something you want to pay attention to and look deeper. Like with most of these things, guys, just because you see this, it's not an automatic cross off. I would say S tier on this list probably is. I mean, wants to check your phone all the time. You could probably manage it, but you get the point, right? S tier is getting very close to auto cutoff. A little bit less, and then D is not conclusive, right? That's the whole idea here. All right, single mom. This one gets a lot of attention online for sure. And I think it depends which community you're looking at. Of course, I'm talking to guys. This tier list is for guys, so I'm not going to be that touchy about the emotional side of things, which obviously everybody wants to introduce emotions and make it all about the character of the person, even though someone else has to pay for it. A lot of people don't want to accept that reality that somebody always has to pay the price for something else. The fact that people feel entitled to it is my issue here. There's nothing inherently wrong with a single mother, but if she's out here pretending that she deserves the world, I think it gets into a little bit controversial territory at some point. we have to come to reality and understand that having a child is definitely going to have implications on someone coming into that scenario. For this reason, I'm going to put it into S tier. Even if the single mom is an absolute angel, you will have to deal with the reality of the child at some point. Whether that means less time for you, whether that means you taking responsibility partially of someone else's child, there's probably going to be some sort of drama from it, right? Because you can't have authority of the child, but you're going to be expected in some way to provide for the child. So it gets really, really complicated very, very quickly. Of course, there's always the high probability that that father now, the other man, will always be in the woman's life in some form. That's something that you're going to have to deal with in some way. It's an unflattering truth, but it is what it is. Even if the woman herself is a very good woman, you're going to have some sort of pushback from this, which is why it's going to be an S tier. If there's an S minus, I'd probably put an S minus only because OnlyFans is much more egregious than having a child. But at the same time, it will make your life much, much more difficult, even if she's really good. So something you have to consider. Too much makeup. So this one falls into a very similar spectrum as Botox, fillers, surgery. This is all part of this vanity thing. It's not always specific to girls that are less attractive and more attractive. It's girls that are extremely vain and want to look as perfect as possible. For this reason, I'm going to put it under Botox and filler only because it's temporary and not permanent or semi-permanent. Can't cook. So this one is extremely common now. A huge percentage of girls don't cook anymore. I think the whole idea of cooking isn't so much about cooking quality food. It's supposed to be a submissive act. It's supposed to be one of those things that a girl does for you that saves you time and makes you feel like she's taking care of you. A lot of girls get really mad about this because they always say, oh, if we have money, why don't we order takeout? It's not about the takeout. It's about the principle, of course. Not to mention the fact that home cooked food is usually way healthier than takeout food anyway. It's a bit of a tough one, but because it's not permanent, it's pretty easy to learn how to cook. So I'm going to leave it at C tier for now. Does not clean up after herself. This one right here is pretty bad because it sort of shows that everything was done for her whole life. Women that don't have any sense of decency when it comes to this or any sense of responsibility, they typically aren't that great people, and most of the time they're going to be a massive headache in a long-term relationship. Surprisingly, I'm probably going to put this in A tier, and I'm even going to put it ahead of tattoos. I think a number of years ago, I probably wouldn't have ranked it this way, but currently, in 2024, I think this does not clean up after herself, needs to be looked at much more carefully than people expect. Extremely indecisive. Okay, so let's be honest, guys. Very feminine women are always indecisive. They always have a lot of anxiety around the decision making of things because they don't want to be wrong about things. This is just the nature of the feminine. For this reason, this is definitely going to be in D tier. This is not something that should bother you as a guy unless you're very, very feminine and completely out of touch with what your role is. No motivation in life. Absolutely no motivation in life is a bit dangerous. I think the issue with this is that motivation in life is always seen through the masculine lens, which is through career, achievement, and all these things. I think there is feminine motivation too, like the motivation to have a family and have children, all those things. I think there are different types of motivation. So for her to have zero motivation in life is a bit dangerous. This one's a little bit tough for sure. I'm probably going to put this on the top of A tier. If you don't have a strong enough reason to do something, you're likely not to do it. This could apply to anything, of course. So I think it's pretty important. I'm going to put it top of A tier. One of the guys, okay, this one's really interesting as well. A lot of times they are more masculine. When girls are one of the guys, they obviously tend to hang around guys a lot more. It sort of gives them the same vibe as a car fanatic. The girl likely doesn't hang out with girls because she thinks that she's an alpha female, but at the same time, she's probably a little bit of a pick-me, drinks beer, stuff like this. I'm gonna put this in A tier. All these are a bit tough. This one's a little bit up for interpretation, I would say. Trust issues. Pretty typical of girls that have been hurt in the past and can't let go, obviously. When it comes to a long-term relationship, of course, if a girl has these types of trust issues, it's going to be a problem for you, and you're always going to be the one to have to manage it, and you're always going to be the one who's responsible when it doesn't work out. For this reason, I'm going to put it up beside excessive jealousy. I'm going to put it right behind, though, in A tier. Controlling. So I'm going to put controlling in S tier. The main reason I'm going to put this in S tier is because the need to control is typically a masculine need. The masculine likes to be in control of its destiny. The feminine is more oriented towards chaos, the unknown, the whatever happens, happens sort of mentality. Nothing will put more pressure on you as a guy long-term than a girl that's constantly trying to control what you do. You can probably tolerate it for a little bit, but eventually it's going to wear you down to the point that you submit or that you leave. Don't let this one slide, especially early on.